Welcome, everyone. This is Mr. Rich. It is a foggy Monday morning, about 6:53, and I'm getting ready for tomorrow, which is today now in your time. Anyway, I think I'm in Louisiana by this time, and giving you this lecture by video. So it's a little unconventional, I know, but this is the modern age, so I hope you enjoy this technologically rich experience. Rich. How about that pun? Okay, anyways, we're talking about archaic Greece here, and it's really taking us from the Bronze Age collapse, which we know affected far more than just the Greeks in 1177, to the earliest reform movements. Especially we're going to focus in Athens and Sparta, but these reform movements were going to have effects all over the place. But anyway, we're moving from this Bronze Age collapse, where society is really kind of just pulling itself together, to the more formal, highly structured governments of the classical era. And we call this period of transition the Archaic era, or Archaic Greece. So let's just recap real quick. First thing is, we've seen the Bronze Age already, and that's sort of the mysterious, legendary past that was investigated by guys like Heinrich Schliemann and Sir Arthur Evans and Michael Ventris, the era of the Minoans, the Mycenaeans, which was brought to a close, we think, possibly by this devastating Trojan War. That, of course, is just theory, as is so much of our knowledge about that period. This takes us into a 300-year period we call it the Dark Age, or the Bronze Age collapse, in which you saw the pottery and writing just almost vanished off the face of the archaeological map. And so we're coming out of that period now from about 900 to 507 BC in the Archaic period. Now, the reason that last date is so specific is because that is the year that Cleisthenes issued the first fully democratic constitution in Athens and really revolutionized Athenian government from that point forward. Our first question in dealing with the Archaic period is going to be how geography influences history. Because this certainly has an effect all over the world, but in Athens, in Attica, even down in the Peloponnese, it's a fairly strong correlation between the geography and the terrain and the development of those people. So let's take a look at the location we're talking about here. Remember, the location is going to be called Hellas. And what you'll notice here, this is the Peloponnese mostly, connecting up in the northeastern corner to Attica, okay, which is where we'll find Athens, Boeotia, Thebes, other important city-states. And of course, down in Peloponnese, we're going to have Mycenae, we're going to have Sparta, in the Isthmus there, we're going to have Corinth. Okay, so these are all like hugely important cities in the coming history of Greece. Now, the rough terrain of Greece, you can see, is going to make it a tough place to live. Okay? And naturally, it's not going to lend itself to the large empires of Mesopotamia and Egypt, which gathered around these relatively flat landscapes, marked by, of course, very nutrient-rich rivers that would flood and bring much needed water and fertilization to nearby crops. These lands are going to be much smaller, and they're going to be autonomous. We're going to call them their city-states or polis. A polis being the plural of polis. So you're not going to see big empires arising in Greece, not until the time of Alexander the Great, really. Okay, so that's going to be, just to give you a sense, we're hanging around with Homer. We're hanging around 750 BC. Alexander the Great's going to die in 323 BC. So it's still a good 300 years before we ever see a real empire develop in this land. Thucydides, of course, told us that the landscape of Attica, which is again up to the right here, was especially rough and difficult to settle, which is, looking at the map here, you might think, well, that doesn't make a lot of sense. It looks like the Peloponnese is far rougher. The mountains in the north central region of the Peloponnese extending all the way down to that index finger are really seem to be more severe, higher up, and that, frankly, it's true. It's just I think the thing that happened is that Attica ended up being just more nomadic for one reason or another. Thucydides, may or may not be correct that it had anything to do with the landscape. Now, we'll say this: it's still a hard place to grow a good crop. Okay, the kinds of crops that you end up growing there: wheat, olives, lots, and whatever grass you can grow for herds. It's hard to pull off. Okay, there's no question about that. And Attica is going to be a place that experiences, that's going to be. They're going to be subject to the weather, the climate, and the ups and downs of agriculture as much as anybody will. Okay, places like Corinth, which are going to be on that isthmus again, connecting Peloponnese and Attica, they're going to thrive because they become a sea people. They become people that trade and make all their money bringing in and sending out goods. Well, the complicated terrain of ancient Attica gave rise to an interesting development in city planning, which we're calling the polis model. And if we look here at, this is Sargon's empire from 2334 BC, you can see that this is very early on. I mean, this is like, this is early history here, and already a single person has kind of gathered all the city-states together and has turned them into a single empire. Again, you can see the reason for that is because he's got relatively flat land and a lot of accessible water, a reliable source with the two rivers, even though they did have a tendency to flood violently. Nevertheless, they were there, they were accessible, and the ancient people developed ways of dealing with those violent floods. Well, in Attica, you don't have anything like that. Neither do you have anything like that in Peloponnese. Water is here and there. The best water is, the most reliable water is, of course, the ocean water, and that's good for nothing except for sailing. So you're not going to see a big empire develop in a land like that for thousands of years, really, compared to Sargon. I mean, Sargon has got his in 2334. It's going to be 2,000 years before Alexander the Great is able to pull all the city-states of Hellas together. So what we get is the polis. Okay, so what is a polis? Let's talk a little bit about that now. Polis is it's another word for city-state. Why do we use this word? Why don't we call it a city? Why don't we call it a state? Why don't we call it a kingdom? Well, it's an odd thing because it's small geographically, but it is autonomous and independent. So it has all the qualities that you and I associate with an independent nation or kingdom, but it really has the size and the culture of a city, like Birmingham or smaller. Okay. Soon we'll show you a map and show you just how close, just how small a place like Athens really is. But you have to keep in mind that as small as it was, they considered themselves a nation. They considered themselves independent. So it'd be like, having the political independence and autonomy of America, but being smaller than the state of Alabama. That's why we use this unique term, because it really doesn't make sense to call it anything else, because it doesn't seem to be a nation, doesn't seem to be just a city. Now, the polis had several different characteristics. As I've already said, they were politically autonomous. But beyond that, there was a strong ethnic identity associated with the polis. Even though the Greeks worshiped the same gods, spoke the same language, relatively speaking, and probably all looked very similar, their identity with their polis was one of the strongest parts of their understanding of self. So they were Athenians, Corinthians, Spartans. These were different peoples, and they saw themselves almost as different races. The correlation was so strong. In every polis, the center of focus, the center of activity, the center of government is going to be a city. It's going to be a city with what we call an agricultural hinterland. So if you can, just picture in your head like two concentric circles, the smaller one being on the inside, that's going to be the city. And there's going to be a concentration there of wealth, of commercial activity, of government, and culture. It's all going to be taking place there. And then out around that city, you're going to have all kinds of agricultural enterprises, like what do they call it? The Mediterranean triad, the olives, the wheat, and the sheep. Okay, so that's going to be taking place outside of the city. Last thing to say is this: just as there was a strong ethnic identity with the mother polis, okay, so also there is a strong loyalty to the mother polis. I'm saying mother polis, of course, because that's where we get the word metropolis. So the polis was everything for the ancient Greek, especially the free ancient Greek. And it was the place that they understood themselves. It was where they got their identity. They would fight and die for this polis, remembering, of course, that it is the size of a modern city. So this was an odd situation in which people felt all the same patriotism, loyalty, and fervor, devotion for a nation, but they felt it for a very small geographic region and a very limited number of people. So what effect did this have? Well, we have two big factors. We've got isolation, okay, because cities like Athens and Corinth were separated not only by distance, but actually by usually mountainous regions and bodies of water. So there was a sense of us and them, a sense of separation. And each of these places is autonomous. Okay, so when you have this kind of isolation and autonomy, what do you get? It's perpetual regional conflict. And that is going to be one of the most common factors in the history of the ancient Greeks up to the time of Alexander the Great. So from the time we're talking about where Homer is writing his epics, all the way through the democratic reforms, all the way through the Persian War, all the way through the Peloponnesian War, the Greek city-states are at constant war with one another. And there is hardly ever a moment of unity. It is constant, ongoing regional conflict. Again, it would be like the city of Birmingham waging war with the city of Montgomery, if you want to keep it all in perspective. So, what are the consequences to this? Well, this is naturally, as Thucydides told us, it's going to give rise to defensive concerns. These city-states are going to be interested in protecting themselves, especially their wealth, especially their rulers. And so, most of these cities are going to arise around a central structure called an acropolis. The acropolis is a raised area in the city. Acropolis literally means high city. And its primary function is to be the seat of government, a place of refuge, and sort of the place of all things you would need to be protected. So the religion tends to take place here. All the most important temples are in the Acropolis. The treasury is in the Acropolis. And so these cities arose around this central fortification called the Acropolis because there was just going to be ongoing constant fighting. Even after these city-states had become permanent, even after they had enjoyed a measure of prosperity, there was still going to be ongoing fighting. So the Acropolis becomes the centerpiece, and there are two other important features of the ancient polis. So the Acropolis becomes the centerpiece. We're looking here at a replica of the city of Athens in ancient times. So there is the Acropolis, the centerpiece, remember, and then from there you have what's called the agora. Right around the base of the Acropolis, you have the agora. It literally means gathering place, and this was the market. This was the primary place of commerce and exchange of goods. So culture would really develop around the Acropolis here. Often your theaters are going to be here. Your athletic events be held somewhere around there too. And then out in the distance, of course, you've got the Chora. That's what we call the agricultural hinterland. It's the place where all of the food is grown. And so you have these concentric circles, okay, with the Acropolis being the very kind of point middle, out from that being the agora, and then far out and occupying easily the most territory or the more square footage is the Chora. That's the countryside. Well, these city-states, the city-state model, the polis model, gave rise to prosperity. All the things that Thucydides mentions in his early history of the Hellenes, they were able to stay in one place finally because they had a strong fortification and a thriving economy. There was peace within the tribe. okay, or within the city-state itself, not between the tribes necessarily, but within the tribes. So there wasn't like tribal conflict anymore. There were long stretches now of time when a person could live pretty much without harassment or fear of having his things taken by a neighboring family. This leads to prosperity, and the city-states begin to grow very wealthy. And as they grow wealthy, they can afford more food, they are more comfortable, they are healthier, and of course they start having more babies, and those babies start to survive. This is the natural consequence. So the stability and peace leads to greater wealth. The greater wealth leads to a higher birth rate. The problem is, you saw on a map what these places look like. They are not the sorts of place that can handle huge populations. These are small pockets of flat land, itself not very arable, and by arable I mean conducive for growing crops. So it's a hard place to be a farmer. Remember, this is before the age of high-powered fertilizers and insecticides and all kinds of genetically modified crops. So when the population starts to grow, the pressure in these city-states heats up, and all of these city-states begin around the same time, for about 200 years, they begin to send out colonizing expeditions across the Mediterranean world. And they basically settle most of what we know as the Greco-Roman world at that time. There are a couple of important ones here. There is Byzantium. This was one of the earliest Greek settlement cities. And it's going to be important historically because it's going to be the longest lasting vestige of the classical world. So when the Roman Empire rises, pretty soon, and becomes an empire around the turn of the millennium, and then falls in 476, okay, Byzantium keeps on going. Byzantium keeps on going till about 1453. So just to give you perspective, think about that. That's less than 600 years ago. So less than 600 years ago, the last vestige of the Roman Empire was still standing in this little city of Byzantium, which was settled, back early in the BC era, 750 to 550 BC. Another big influential settlement would be Magna Graecia, or Magna Graecia, I don't know, however we want to pronounce that. But the point is that this was, of course, some of the early cities in southern Italy and Sicily there that would be heavily influential in developing the culture of the Romans. It is going to be, it's going to be one of the reasons why the Romans rise up with a culture so similar to the Greeks. It's because they've been influenced by Greeks who colonized those regions. All of this, okay, creates a new situation. We have Greeks in other parts of the Mediterranean world sailing off, setting up new colonies. Of course, these colonies now are going to have their own means of bringing in money and wealth, because they are now not only Greek settlements, but they are trading outposts. It's like imagine if you were a trucking company and you were shipping your goods up and down 65 along the state of Alabama. Imagine buying your own gas station, buying your own place where a trucker could stop and at no charge could fill up his own truck with gas, get some Snickers bars and high caffeinated drinks, and then get back on the road. And he had no charge. He stopped there and moved on. But everybody else who came in, you could charge them premium rates for your gas, because you may or may not have been like the only gig in town. You might be the only gas station for 50 miles in either direction. You can see how having that sort of outpost would be really lucrative for you, be really helpful. Same thing goes for these new colonies. These new colonies became really lucrative investments for the mother city or metropolis. And remember that these colonists would go out and find a new place to settle, but they took with them their loyalty to the mother city or the metropolis. So it wasn't as though they just left everything behind and forgot about their family, forgot about their home. No, they still had a kind of primary loyalty to that home, which meant that the metropolis tended to grow in wealth, tended to get increasingly wealthy, lots more money starts to flow in. And as a result, we get a brand new economy and a new economic situation, which is going to bring with it a whole host of new problems and new issues that the Greeks will have to deal with. But that is for another day. So hope you've enjoyed this, and I'll be back tomorrow, and we'll keep going with this. See you then.